Alright everyone, hopefully you are able to hear me and see the screen. Can you hear me? Can somebody type in the chat that there is no problem?
I can hear you.
Okay, nice, thanks. So before we start, we have some announcements. So the homework 3 is assigned. And some people from the other section said that the due date is so close, so the Semra Hoca puts the due date, so you should ask her if you want extension, etc. But for the project stages, in this week we are going to finish giving the feedback of design stage 2, and I think some of you already received your feedback. And for all the upcoming stages, we uploaded a functional requirement document. Basically, in this document, we have all the remaining due dates. So for implementation stage 1, we want you to start creating the access database by creating the tables and the relations, and we want at least 10 meaningful entries per table. And this is going to be due on 27th of April, so you have lots of time to do that, and this is one of the simplest tasks for the project. And after you upload this stage, usually we sometimes groups show it to the TA, but most of the time it is not required. So if your TA thinks that it is necessary to meet for this stage feedback, you might arrange some meeting on Zoom, etc. But otherwise we do not have the project lab 1 anymore, so there is only one project lab, and it's on the 15th week. In the schedule before, there was also a lab in the 13th week that was like a backup plan for the implementation stage 1, but we think that we can look at your databases and give you feedback, and in this stage most of the time there is no problem with creating any of the databases, etc. And by the way, if you need to ask any question about the project, etc., you can email us, and if you need, we can again arrange some Zoom meetings, etc. For the implementation stage 2, in this document for each of the projects there are 3 different scenarios, and you are going to choose one of them for the implementation stage 2 and do it using the user interfaces. So today we are starting user interfaces, and next week we also have a lab with the same topic, and it is going to be with the Windows applications. Similar to that, you are going to have some buttons, etc. We are going to study on that today. Basically we want you to implement one of the scenarios for second stage of the implementation, and again we have the due date for it. And for the final demo, the last day to upload it is 29th of May, but before that time you should arrange a meeting with your TA to do the demo. So for implementation stage 2 and for the final demo, you are going to meet with your responsible TA. So for each project group, you know your TA, and you are going to meet with them and explain the things you have done, showing the database. So one person should have access installed on the computer and should be able to share the screen to show it. And for the demo, you are going to arrange a time with us before this last day. There is also the peer review. If you are giving 100 to everyone, you don't need to upload it, but the last upload date is also given in this part. Other than that, so if you do not have any questions about these, we can start. So we have the Lab 5 example database on the website. If you have access, you can download it to follow us. And there is also a handout available from earlier years. This is for some reference. We are not going to follow it one by one, but if you would like to review some topics, somewhat they are contained here, but it's not in detail. And again, we are recording this. I'm using a different software to record, therefore you do not see the Zoom recording sign, but it will be available once I upload it. And for the other section as well, the other sections video is also available now on the website. So today we are starting doing stuff in user interfaces, and like why do we do it is because if you implement your tables database, you have your queries, but the regular users are going to use it. So you need to like simplify some of the tasks and also have some restrictions. So if you give the whole database to the user, for example, the user could open any of the tables, could change some of them, and like could make wrong changes, etc. And the user does not want to like know how the implementation is to be able to use your database. So we are trying to give a better user experience with the graphical elements, let's say. And in Access, every window is called a form. So under this Create tab, we have the option to create forms. We have some form wizard, etc. But in this course, we are going to always start with a blank form. So when you click on the blank form, you have your form. Again, similar to tables and queries, when we create a new item, we need to first save it and give a name to it. And with forms, it is more important because we are going to refer to some of these elements inside a form. So this is like a window of the application. You are going to have some buttons. You will be able to input some text into like areas. And to be able to access those items from our queries, we need to refer to them with their name. And also we need the name of the form. So if you do not save it, then you cannot like access it from other parts like queries. So I'm going to save it first, Control S to save it, giving the name, let's say tests for this one. We are not focusing on some task. We will try to first see each of the items that we can use. Similar to other objects, we have several different views. The layout view is when we are editing it, when we are putting some elements together inside the form. And to use the form, we should be in the form view. There is also design view, but design view does not follow a layout, so it is kind of harder to put elements together in there. So therefore, we are going to use the layout view. So while we are in the layout view, on this design tab, we have a bunch of elements that we can put into our form. And the most basic one is this third item here. It's a label. And we use labels to give information to the user. So when you click on this label, and you can click on any part in your like form, it creates a label, and it's you can type anything on it. Like let's say welcome to the form, etc. When you first write it, it automatically resizes it. And these are like static elements, so we do not need to get some value out of a label. We just want to give information to the user about like what to write here, what to do, etc. And for each of the items that we can place here, we have a bunch of properties. So to see them, you can right click any of the items, and then you can go into the properties. On the screen on the right, we have the property sheets. There are like different tabs, and we are going to be under the all tab. So these are all the things that the label has. Some of them are about the font, some of them about the style, etc. But we are going to only use a couple of them. The most important thing that we are going to use is the name of the elements. So for labels, name is not that really important because the user is not going to type anything inside the label. The user cannot type anything inside the label. And we do not want to get anything out of the labels. Therefore, for labels, the name is not that important. But for other items, sometimes we would like to get input of the user. in that time the name would be important. The caption is what's written inside this label. So I can add some additional text here. It is updated, but the size of this label is not enough to show it now. I can, like, each of the elements, I can going into the corners and sides, the mouse cursor changes, I can resize any of the elements that I put on my form. So for example, we also have like things like font size, the alignment, etc. You can like play with them if you want, but for labels we just need to initialize the caption. Some other item that we use most of the time is a text box. So it is this second item we have. If you click on it and click on any empty area. By the way, since we are following some layouts, there is some layout in this form, I cannot put the element into a random place. It is going to be in respect to the existing item. So I can put to the right of this existing label or at the bottom, etc. So I'm going to put it at the bottom of it. And each label, each text box also comes with a label. So these are two different elements. So most of the time in text boxes, we expect the user to type something. Therefore, to have some information to the user, we also have the label too. So these are two distinct items. And remember, each of the items has a different name. So sometimes when you create the text box first, people mistakenly change the label's name instead of the text box, so be careful about it. So to be able to get the value out of a text box, we need to change the name of the text box. So right now it is saying text2. I'm going to rename it like something like uname for username for now, because I expect, let's say, the name of the user in this text box. So I can also double click and edit the text of this label. I can say username, maybe I expect the username in this box, and I rename the text boxes, the element's name as uname. So remember, to use the form, I should be in the form view. So right clicking on the tab, I'm going into the form view. Then I can type something into this text box. Right now I am not able to edit the elements. This is how the user is going to use it. To return back to editing, I should be in the layout view. And right now there is some text because like it keeps the information in the elements while the form is open. But if I like save this form and close it, when I reopen it on this area on the left, it will be empty. So these values are not saved in the text boxes, etc. They are only like available while the form is open. So to put some functionality, we need buttons. Like the user is going to type something here and then like push onto the button to do stuff. So I'm going to add a button. It is the fourth element here. Again, similarly, I can place it anywhere. And when I try to add a button, it also comes up with the wizard. So for some tasks, you can use the wizard, but these are more restricted. So there are like singular, let's say, functions for defined for a button. And most of the time we would like to do multiple things. So sometimes when you click on a button, we would like to run a query, check some value, etc. We would like to be able to do multiple things. Therefore, instead of using the wizard, we are going to use macros. And I'm going to cancel this wizard. So if you click on finish, it is going to do the first option. Do not click on finish. I'm going to click on cancel to cancel the wizard. Double clicking on the button, I can type something, let's say test query. Similar to labels, the name of the button is not that important also, because the button is not going to give me a value. The user is going to click on the button, and to add this functionality, I should right click on the button and click on the build event. And since we are going to use macros, there is also like you can also use Visual Basic. We are not going to cover in this lab. We are going to use macros, and like they are much or less equivalent. Macros are better and simpler. So while the macro builder is selected, I'm going to click on OK. And this is going to be my macro page. So macros are similar to writing code, but we are going to use some ready blocks. If you click on this area, there are different options, different actions they are called in here that we can do. We are going to use only a small subset of it. So I was writing them in the last lab. So these 7 are the ones that we are going to use. And the most simplest one is going to be a message box. You can click on here and search for it, or start typing message box. It will auto-complete it. And when you click on it, you will have your box for the action. And message box simply displays a message in a box to the user. And I can directly type the message in this place. This is the message, let's say. There are some options that you can change, whether you want the beep sound when the message comes up. These message types change the symbols used in the message, and you have also the title of the message. Let's say test message. I can add other actions here. So if I add another message box, the first message box would come up, and then the second message box come up, etc. This is like a code. It functions in a linear way. So to save it, I'm going to click on the save button, and I can close this macro window. And if I would like to go back into that macro page, I need to right click on the button and click on the build event. So since I'm using macros, it will open the macro without me needing to click on the macro builder. So to test it, I should be in the form view. Remember, I'm going into the form view, so you can right click on any of the white area or the tab's name to go into the form view. And right now the button is not using any other value. It has some static text to display. If I click on the test query, it is going to open up this message box with the message that I have just written. So I will click on OK. Now let's say I would like to put the username in this box and would like to display that inside my message. So let's go into the layout view. To be able to get the value of any of the items, I should know its name. So uname is the name of this text box. I know that. I will go into the macro of this button, right click on the button, go into build events. So I was displaying the message. Since it did not contain any parameters, this was the format. I just write the message. But if you would like to use some parameters for the message box, this is like how it's done for message boxes only. I should start with the equals sign. So if you put the equals sign, it means that this is going to be an expression, so I can use parameters, etc. And if you would like to include a string, it should be in double quotations now. So I can say hello, for example. And to append different text, different strings, I use this ampersand sign, the and sign. So I can say, for example, hello, and then I need the username. I know that there is an item called uname. If I start typing, it will auto-complete it. So this is my text box. If I click on it, I will get the value of this text box. And then I can continue to append different texts together. I can say, okay, hello, some name, that, for example, welcome to the form, for example. So to make it larger, I'm going to get it in this place. So that's what I have written there. To indicate that this is an expression, it starts with an equals sign. Each string, each text is contained in double quotations. And any of the item names, since we are in the same form with uname, I can directly refer to uname as uname. Otherwise, I need to specify where it is coming from. We are going to do that soon. for now I'm just using the value of an item that is inside the same form. So I will save it, close it, and going into the form view, let's write some name in the username part. If I click on the test query button, then I see that the parameter is contained in the message as well. Any questions, problems? So if you have any questions, you can interrupt me in any minute. Now we are able to use the value, okay. We can also click on the button to run some query. So maybe going back into the layout view, instead of saying test query on this button, let's say welcome message. Let's add another button to run some query this time. So I'm adding another button at the bottom of the other one, canceling the button wizard. Let's write run query on top of this one. Or let's say open query, because that's how we refer to it in the macro. Is there a way to append items without creating space in between them? So you asked. So I included the spaces here. So if I just omit these spaces inside the string, then it is like next together. Then you would not have any spaces. Okay, thanks. So now I would like to click on this button and run some query. I'm in the layout view, right clicking on the button, going into build event. Again, I'm going to use the macro builder. We have the action open query to run any of the queries. So I'm including the things that I use in the actions in the macro builder. So we use the message box, and the one that we are going to most of the time use is open query. It is used for running some query. And if it is a selection query, it will display the results in the datasheet view. Otherwise, if it's an insertion, deletion, or an update query, it is going to run the query, but since they do not have like any return results, it is going to stay in the same page. For now, I'm going to show the results of some query. We also included in this database some simple queries. So for example, list courses of students, or let's first start with list students. So it is basically listing all the students. And I'm going to save it and close it. Going back into the form view, if I click on this open query, then it is going to run that query and show the results in the datasheet view. So I should maybe also first talk about some of these queries included in this database. So the list students is a simple one. Remember, this is the database that we are using from like the earlier labs. We started with like students were enrolled to courses, teachers were giving courses, etc. In the database, we have the parents user, and all staff, student, and teacher were the children of user table. So to be able to list only the students, I need a join operation in between user and students, because I want to show the name and surname, but I want them only for the students. So if I include two of these tables, by the way, this query is done using QBE. In your projects, you can use QBE or SQL code directly. It's your choice. So this is just making the join operation in between those tables and showing the name and surname of each of the students along with the IDs. We also included a query called find next ID. So in the user table, if you look at it, the IDs are like unique. You need a unique ID, right? And to find the next available ID, what this does is from the user table, for the attribute ID, it finds the maximum of it, it adds 1 to it, and it displays it under the column name next ID. So if I run this query, it will just show me the next available ID. So if I would like to add a new user, its ID should be 16, it's the next ID. We also have list courses of student query. So if I look at it, it is making the join operations to show the courses the students is enrolled into, and we are using the SID parameter. Remember, if I include some parameter name in between the square brackets, if it is not an existing parameter, it will ask the user to input that value. So if I run this query, it asks for an ID of the student. So 9 is a valid ID for student. If I enter it, it will display the courses of the student. Going back into our test form, most of the time, so if you open the query in the datasheet view, the person could like change the text in here and it will be applied to your database as well. And if we would like to just show the elements without enabling user to change them, then we need some better way of showing things inside the form. So now we are going to use some other item to display the results of a query inside the form. So I'm going into the layout view of my form. To do that, so to show multiple items that are results of a query or a table, we have list boxes and combo boxes. With list boxes, you can display multiple things together. With combo boxes, there are multiple options, but one of them is displayed at a time. So usually we use combo boxes to let the user choose among something, and list boxes to like give information or list things. So I'm going to use this list box and click on any empty place in my form, and it brings us the list box wizard. For list boxes and combo boxes, we are going to use the wizard. So wizard helps us to like attach the queries and design the shape of the columns, etc., as we desire according to the things we would like to display. If you do not use the wizard for list boxes and combo boxes, things get hard. So we advise you to use the wizard. So I have option to get the values out of a table or a query, or the second option is that I type some static values. So I would like to use the first option now, because I'm going to use the results of the query called list students. So while the first option is selected, I'm going to click on next. I have my tables and queries. These are the saved ones in this database. In here, I would like to display the results of a query, and that query is called list students. If I click on next, then I have the return results of this query, these columns. So if I were to look into the list students query, it projects student ID, username, and surname. So I can include any of these in my list box. And most of the time with combo boxes and list boxes, if we would like to choose something, we need the primary key of that table. So most of the time, it is better to also include the primary key as an available field. So I'm going to include all of them, so you can like adjust it with these arrow keys, etc. So I'm going to show all three columns in this list box. I will click on next. I have the option to order according to some of these attributes. Let's say let's order them according to first the username and then the surname, etc. I'm going to click on next, and then this shows an example view of my list box. So this query returns these results, and since this query was not dependent on any parameters, it can display the results in this view. So sometimes we are going to have a parameter inside the query, then it is going to just show the format of the columns. It will not be able to show the data because it does not have the parameter yet. So I'm going to click on next. This part is important if we would like to get the value out of this element. So for combo boxes and list boxes, we can have multiple attributes, and when we select some row in that combo box or list box, which of these attributes should be returned? And in this part, we need the primary key. So let's say I'm displaying all the students. I would like to choose one of the students, and maybe that student will be enrolled to some course. In that case, I need the unique thing that defines a student. That's the primary key. So when I choose one line from this list box, it should return the student ID. Click on next, then it is going to also create a label for the list box similar to text boxes. It also comes with a label. What should be written in this label, it is asking. So like we can change it at any time, so it is not that important. I'm going to click on finish, and I have my list box as well as that label, and I can resize my text box, resize my list box. And if it is not fitting in the current view, you have the scroll bar, and it is displaying the results of the query. So if I also go into the form view, this is the results of the query, list student query, and it is shown in the form, so the user cannot change the content of these entries. So in the project as well, we expect you to use like list boxes if you are showing some data to the user instead of opening the datasheet view. So this is like a better way of showing it. Any questions, problems so far? Now let's start with some task. Let's say I would like to have some form to add new users, to create some new users. And to do that, we also included some insertion queries here. If we go into the design view of it, so it is inserting into the user table. These are the attributes that we need to create some new user, and they are given as parameters for now in this query. So if I run this query, it is going to ask these parameters one by one. So for example, I can say like let's say 20 for the ID, some username, maybe Ali, surname Veli, and some password. It is going to append a row. If I click on OK and go into the user table, so since the user table was already open, I need to hit the F5 key on my keyboard to refresh it. I would see the new entry. Now I would like to do the similar thing using forms. So I'm going to create a new form, going to create a blank form. I need to first save it. So Control S, let's say user insert for this one. I should be in the layout view to put some elements together. Now remember, I need 4 things. So I'm going to get 4 of them using text boxes. So I will add 4 different text boxes into my form. And for the labels, to give some information to the user, I will write what I expect for that text box: ID, name, surname, and it was, I guess, let me check the password. Okay. So now I would like to be able to get the value out of these elements. So I should give some meaningful names to those items. So right clicking on the first text box, I'm going into the properties. And for the first one, let's call it UID for the user's ID. For the second one, I'm going to call it uname for username, username. By the way, I think these are case sensitive, so make sure that you are typing the same thing in the queries as well. We are going to write it inside the queries in a second. And for this, let's say upass for user password. So I have the names UID, uname, username, upass, and then I can refer to them inside my query. So insert user query. If I open it in the SQL view, previously I was using some parameters. Instead of using the parameters, I'm going to get the values from a form. And to do that, we have this following structure. So to say that, okay, I'm getting some value out of forms, I should start by saying forms. And we have the exclamation marks to say that, okay, inside these forms object, out of every form, then we give the form name. So in our case, it was called user insert. Inside that user insert form, I have an item. So in this section, we called it UID. So there is an item called UID, get the value out of it. Inside the query, this is how I refer to any element in the form. Forms, the name of the form, and then the name of the element. So I'm going to get it inside my query. Instead of using this parameter, I'm going to get the value out of the UID text box inside my form. And for username, I have the one called uname, and for the surname, I have the text box called surname, and for the password, I have upass. So if I save it, going back into my new form, okay, this query is going to use these values, but to run that query, I need a button as well. I should be in the layout view under this design tab. I can add a button in this form. I will cancel the button wizard, and we can say like add user onto this button. Right clicking on it, going into build event, I will use the macro builder. What I want to do is to run some query, and it is called open query. So if I start typing open query, it will auto complete it. And the query that I would like to run is called insert user, the one that I just modified. I'm going to save and close it. So there is one special thing about updates, insertion, and deletion queries. So since I'm using the action called open query, if that query is open as a tab, instead of running that query, it will navigate into that open tab. So you should make sure that the queries are not open if you are running them from your forms. So that's like one tiny thing to be careful about. Now if I go into the form view, I should be able to type something here. Let's say Ayşe, Mayşe. And if I click on the add user button, it says that, okay, you are going to run some query that will modify your tables. It is going to append one row. And if I go into the user table and refresh it, I will see that I successfully added a new user using the form text boxes. And the problem with typing the ID directly is, so let's say if I would like to add some other person, AABB something, and if I don't know the correct ID, it might fail. And the user might not know what's wrong. So it's saying, okay, it is because of the key violation. But if I'm inserting some new users, maybe I should not be typing the ID. So since the IDs are automatically generated in this case, it should be. But if it was like the national ID, if I needed to type it, so in that case it's meaningful. But these IDs do not correspond to anything, so it is just in our database. These IDs are assigned just in our database. Therefore, it would make sense to find the next available ID automatically. Remember, we had a query called find next ID. If we run it, it was displaying the next available ID. So if I run it, it will display the next available ID. It just showed the last value because it was open for the 16, but the correct result is for this setup 22 now, because the last user was 21. So instead of asking for the ID from the user, I would like to get the ID automatically. And to do that, okay, I have the query, but inside my insert user query, I cannot directly write the result of that query. To pass the result of some query, we are going to use a function. And let's go into our form, into the layout view. When I click on this button, so right click on the button, go into the build event. Before running my query, I would like to set a temporary variable. And the value of that temporary variable is going to be the next available ID. So I'm going to add a new action. It is called setTempVar to set a temporary variable. So this is also included here. We are going to use it a lot. So while the database is running, there is a temporary variables table. I can give names to these temporary variables and put some values into them, and I can access the values at any time from any place. So once I set a temporary variable, I can use that temporary variable inside the forms, inside the queries, etc. So the name is what I call this variable. Let's say I'm going to get the next ID. Let's call it NID for next ID. And I need to set it to some value. I can just write directly some value here. Then it is going to set that value. But instead of doing that, I would like to get the value out of a query. And to get a value out of a query in macro, we can use the dlookup function. So for dlookup function, we have this structure. So for dlookup function, it's a function. So if I, into this expression part, if I start typing dlookup, it will auto-complete it. It is a function that I can use inside macro. And it expects the attribute name as the first parameter and the query name as the second parameter. And these names should be inside double quotations, and there should be a semicolon in between. So be careful about these symbols, otherwise it will give you an error. And the query name as well as the attribute name should match exactly. These are case sensitive. So if, for example, there is some typo in some place, it is going to give you an error, a macro error. So for example, in our case, we would like to run the query called find next ID. And remember, in that query, we find the maximum of the ID, we add 1 to it, and we rename that column as next ID, because otherwise the functions, the column name of the functions are automatically generated. Since we would like to be able to refer to that column, we are giving a name to it in the query. So using this dlookup function, it is going to run the query. The query could return more than one result. It is going to get the first result. So for the first row it returns, it is going to give us this attribute if I use this one. So I'm going to write it as my expression. But I should set the temporary variable before running the query. So each of these boxes are executed in a linear fashion. So I am able to carry them around to give an ordering. While the box is selected, there are also green arrow keys that help you to move them up or down. So I need to first set the temporary variable, and then I'm going to use this temporary variable inside my query. So for now, I'm going to save it, close it, and I need to go into the insert user query now. This is my insertion query. Previously, we were using the UID that's given by the user. Now we are setting some temporary variable, and remember I said we can access the temporary variable from any part. If I would like to use it in a query, then I can use this notation. So starting with tempvars, exclamation mark, and name of the variable. So in our case it will start with tempvars, and we named it NID for next ID. So if we can say that before coming to this query, we will set this variable, then we can just directly use it inside our query. So I just paste instead of the ID text box, now get the ID value out of this temporary variable called NID. So I'm going to save this query and close it. Now in the user insert form, I'm going to delete the ID part because now we are generating the IDs automatically. And I'm going to just show the buttons macro again. So I know that I set NID first. So it is going to get its result out of a query. And this NID can be used inside this query then because I'm setting it. And after this part, in any of the forms, in any of the queries, I can use the value of NID. Once it's set, I can use it from any place. So now if I go into the form view, I am able to click on the add user button, maybe multiple times for different users, etc. And if I check the user table, if I refresh it, then I see that okay, I'm able to add the users and the IDs are generated automatically. Any questions, problems? Now we would like to be able to also choose the type of the user. So remember, in our database, we add the name, surname, and password into the user table. But if that user is a teacher, for example, we need to put the ID of that user into teachers table as well. Or if it's a student, we need to add a separate ID inside this student table. These IDs should match. So we need to be able to choose among some options. We can put a text box in this form as well. So we can ask, okay, write the type of user that you would like to be. But in that case, there would be lots of typos. The user could write something irrelevant. Then we cannot check whether it is some existing type or not. So if we would like to give some options to the user, one element that we can use is a combo box. So I'm going into the layout view again. I'm going to use the combo box item. It is this one. I will click on some empty place. It also comes with a wizard. Remember, similar to the list box, we are going to use the wizard. This time I would like to type the values because I'm going to give 3 options to the user for teacher, staff, and student. I'm not going to get the values out of a query or a table. While the second option is selected, I'm going to click on next. Then I can design my data. So I'm going to say I need 2 columns. So to make the comparisons, in one of them I will include numbers. And for each of the numbers, I'm going to specify the user type. So students, teacher, and staff. So I'm basically saying that, okay, choose one of these. And to check which one the user has chosen, I'm going to use the value of column 1. So in column 1, I have the integers. In column 2, I have the information. So I will click on next. When the user chooses one of them, which value I'm interested in, it was the column 1's value because I have the numbers in there. So once user chooses something in this combo box, I want the value of column 1. So I will click on next. So it will create a label for me. And next to it, I want to say type. So when I click on finish, if I go into the form view, when I click on the combo box, I have the different user types, and the user is only able to choose among them. And once the user chooses some of them, one of them, the value of this item is replaced with the number value, the column 1's value. Then I'm going to be able to check it using an if-else statement. But let's give a 10 minutes break first, and then we will continue. Okay, shall we continue? Okay, let's continue. To recap things, so we added some new combo box to be able to choose the type of user. Because in our current database setup, if we look at into the relationships view, so in here we have the user table as the parent, and using the is a relation we have teacher, student, and staff as children. So whenever we add a new user, I need some other entry inside one of these tables according to the type of that user. For example, if I would like to add a new teacher, I first need to add the user into the user table. For example, let's say Ali Veli is going to be a teacher. The ID of this entry is 20. Then I also need the same entry inside my teacher table. So as this new entry, I should put 20 into that table as well. So this ID should be an existing one. So if I just write a random one, it is not going to accept it because we have this link defined in between teacher and user. If I double click on it, I see that the parent is in this relation link, the parent is user, meaning that I should first add the related entry into the user table, and then to be able to add the entry into the teacher table, that should be an existing one inside the user table. So using this new combo box, so I'm going to close the unrelated ones. So in this new combo box, I'm able to choose one of the available options, and then I need to check which one the user has chosen, because user is going to choose one of them. So it cannot be just some random thing, although we still can write something into this combo box. Like the usual way of using it would be like choosing one value out of it. Going back into the layout view, I'm going to go back into the macro page of the button. So okay, we click on the button, we set the temporary variable finding the next available ID. And if I would like to, let's say, add this user as a student, I would like to add this NID into the student table as well. So first I add it as a new user, then I would like to check something, because according to the type that user has just choose, so I need to look at the name of this combo box, returning back to my form. The name is automatically generated for now. I'm going to rename it, let's say, as type. So going back into the macro of this button, I'm going to use the if action. So similar to other computer programming languages, we can have if-else statements to compare some conditions. So this is my if block. If I want, I can also add an else part. You have the add else part here, or I can also add else if. So if this condition that I'm going to write is true, then do these actions. So this is basically straightforward. And as my condition here, I'm going to check the value of my item. So remember, I renamed the combo box as type. So if I write type here, it is going to get the value of that combo box. And to make comparisons, to check whether it is equal to something, we use just one equals sign here. So in some other languages you might have seen double equals sign to check equalness. In here we use just one equals sign. And I can write some value, so I can write 1. It is going to check whether type, this combo box, its value, whether it is equal to 1 or not. If it's equal to 1, then it is going to perform the actions that I list here. So if it is 1, what I want to do is to open query, and that query is going to be the one to insert student. So for now the insert student, insert teacher, and insert staff queries, I need to modify them as well. For now they expect parameters, but I'm going to change them to use this NID, the next available ID. So it is going to be set once, so this temporary variable is going to be set once. It is going to contain the same value, and I will be able to use the same value to insert it into the user table and also into the related type of users table as well. And then let's say I would like to show some success message. I can use the message box. So if I click on this if, I'm still inside this block. So this is my condition, and these are the things that I do if that condition is true. I can unhide and hide it as well. And I'm going to show the message box. I can, for example, say let's say maybe let's say use some parameters starting with user and sign to concatenate different text together. I know that in here I have a text box called uname. I can get the name of the user from that text box. Appending some other text is added as a student. So I can give information about the type of the user as well. So to make things larger, this is what I written there. So different strings and one value out of a text box. The text box was called uname. And if it is not equal to 1, I added an else part, but for any of the items that we are able to put there, I can use this delete symbol to get rid of them. So for this if block, I'm going to add else if, because I still need to check whether it is 2 or 3. I know that if I'm into this else part, it is not 1, because if it is 1, it is going to do this. Else, I have another if part. Else if it can be 2, so I'm going to write here, look at the value of the combo box name type and check whether it is 2 or not. If it is 2, I'm going to do some similar actions. So I will start by first running the query. For this time, the second entry was teacher. I'm going to say, okay, open query. The query's name is insert teacher. And then let's again display some message box. I can write message box, and the message would be similar. I'm going to copy it from the other one. This time add it as a teacher, let's say. And for this else block, I can add another else if or some else. So I'm going to add an else, because if it is not 1 and not 2, it is going to be 3. In this new else block, I'm going to again open query. The name of the query is going to be this time to insert a staff member. And then the following action would be to display the message, the same message, but this time saying added as a staff member. So in the macro part we are done. I'm going to save and close the macro page, but I need to update stuff inside my insertion queries. So with the insert stuff, we were previously getting the value as a parameter. This time we need to use the temporary variables, and we were using the temporary variable named NID. We were putting the next available ID for this user into that variable. So I'm going to get the value out of my temporary variables. I'm going to save and close this query. For insert students as well, the ID would come from this temporary variables, and we might still ask for the scholarship, or we may, like, let's say when a student is first starting, let's say there is some default payment of 100, we can just type the direct value here, or we might also include some text boxes into our form. Then the user would be able to like type the payment, and we can get it from there as some parameter. So we can say forms exclamation mark insert student form, and then in there we could get the value out of some text box. But for simplicity, let's say the default is 100, so I'm going to save and close this query as well. And for inserting a teacher, we are going to get the ID from same place, but it is going to run only one of these queries. So if I check the macro page, I have if else statements, so either insert student or insert teacher or insert staff query is going to be executed based on the value of the type. So if I go into the form view to try it, so let's say we have some name, surname, and let's say this should be a student. If I click on the student and click on add user part, so this first one is to add the user, it's appending one row, and this second one is to add it into the student table. And once we are done, user TTT, the name of the user, is added as a student. I see this message. So if I would like to add this new user as a teacher, for example, then I would first add it into the teacher table, first add it into the user table, and the second appending is for the teacher table. And I see that this username is added as a teacher, and if I go into the user table, refresh it, so I see that 26 is a teacher, and if I check this teacher table as well, I see 26 in here as well. So going back to our earlier query, the test one, did I not save the, okay, I think I forgot to save the list box. But if I then check my list students query, then I would see this TTT in here as well. So since he is added as a student, the other users I do not see there because they do not have a corresponding entry in the student table. So in your projects as well, we expect such user interfaces, and we say that use the meaningful elements. So for example, in this part, to choose the type of user, using a combo box is more meaningful because you give like limited option to the user so that the user would not do lots of mistakes. Now we are going to also do one more form to do a task, and then let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to create a new form to enroll one student into one of the courses. So going to create and then blank form, this is going to be my new form. I'm going to save it, Control S. Let's call it enroll. So usually we expect for some student to log in into the system, and then that student should be enrolled. That student should be able to enroll some of the courses. But to simplify things, let's first choose the student, choose the course, and by hitting a button, let's enroll that student into that course. And in the next lab, next week, we are going to see how we can do a login system. But for now, let's just choose the student using a combo box. So I'm in the layout view. I'm going to put a combo box here for the students. This time I'm going to get the values out of a table or a query. So for students, remember, in the student table, we just have the IDs of the students. And in this user table, we have all of the users with their names and surnames and passwords. And if I would like to get only the students but with their names and surnames, I have the list students query. So it was just doing a basic join operation between the student table and the user table to list the ID, name and surname of each of the students. So I'm going to get the values of this combo box from a query, and that query is under this queries part is called list students. So clicking on the next, I would like to have all of these attributes. I do not need to sort them according to anything, so I'm going to click on next. This is some example output of that query. Clicking on next. Now, important part, whenever I choose one of the lines in here, which value should be returned? So remember, we need the primary keys. If we are using the table directly, we know it is going to have the primary key. But if I am using some query that I wrote, I should make sure that that query is also returning some unique values if I'm going to choose one of them. If I have the name only, there could be many students with the same name. It is not enough. I need the unique entries, unique attributes as my return results. So I choose student ID, clicking on next. So it is going to also include some label, let's call it student. When I click on finish, if I go into the form view, now by clicking on this combo box, I can list all the existing students. If I choose one of them, it is replaced with the student ID. Now I also need one to list the courses. So going back into the layout view, I'm going to add another combo box. I would like to get the values out of a table, and that table is going to be the course table. I will click on next. In the course table, there is also the description, but to list the courses, I do not need the description. So I'm going to only include the course code and the course name. The course code is the primary key of this table, and the course name shows the name of that course. So clicking on next, I do not need to order them. Next. So this is an example view, and it is hiding the primary keys. So for the results of the query, it did not know which one was the primary key, but for the table results, so since we are getting the results out of the table, it knows which one is the primary key, and you have the option to hide the primary key in this part. So for courses, we do not need to hide the primary key, so because the course codes matter as well. So I'm not going to hide the key column. So clicking on next. So whenever I choose something here, which value should be returned, I need the course code, which is the primary key of this table. Clicking on next, there would be a label next to this. What should be written in there? Let's call it course. And if I click on finish, go into the form view to see it, I will see that the courses are listed and I can choose one of them and it's replaced with that primary key. If I think that the combo box, these are not wide enough, I can go into the layout view, going into the properties of this item. So I should be in the properties of the combo box, and there would be in some parts some value to make it wider. Since it's crowded a lot, so we have the width. I think that's the width of the item, but if I make it larger, would it also, yeah. So if you make the combo box larger, the entries that it shows would be also larger, so you can solve it like that. So I also need a button to add the student into that course. So I'm going to add some button. Let's put it somewhere here. I'm going to cancel the wizard. Let's call it enroll to course. And for the functionality of this button, I need to run some query. That query is not in our database yet. So I need to make some query that adds this student into this course. So we are keeping that information in the enrolled table. Knowing the course code and the name of the student, I can enroll that student into that course. So to do that, I will create a new query, but I will also give some meaningful names to my combo boxes. So for this combo box, let's call it SID for student ID, and for the second one, let's call it CID for course ID. And I will create a new query, going to create query design. I will cancel this dialog. I will go into the SQL view. And like similar to any of our insertion queries, we are going to insert into this time into enrolled table. And the values that I insert would come from temporary variables, or no, sorry. It's not going to come from temporary variables, but I would like to just directly use these values, right? So I'm going to follow this format, saying forms, then the form name, and then item name. So if I look into the enrolled table, the first thing I need is the course code. So in my query, I need to give the course code. So out of every forms, then exclamation mark, I have a form called enroll. So the name of the form is enroll. So I'm going to write it, enroll. Inside that enroll form, the course code comes from a combo box called CID. So I gave the name CID to that item. For the student ID, so for the enroll table as the second value, I need the student ID. Out of every form, inside the enroll form, this time there is a combo box called SID, get the value out of it. And for the grade of that course, so in the enroll table, if you look at, there is also the grade column, but we do not have the grade yet, so I'm going to write null to put some null value into there. And since grade column is not required, then I'm able to put some null values there. If it was required, then I would not be able to enter null values. So this is going to be my query. I'm going to save it. Let's call it enroll SID to CID, and I will close this query. Into my enroll form, in the layout view, I will add this functionality. I will attach this query to the button. So right clicking on the button, going into build event, I would like to use the macro builder. What I would like to do is to just open query, and the query name is the one that I just written. It is enroll SID to CID. I'm going to save it, close it, and going into the form view, I can list my students. Let's choose the new student. I can list the courses. Let's choose, for example, Math 101. If I click on enroll to course, it is going to append one row, going through them. If I look at the enroll table, I would see, so we added into Math 101. So for Math 101, I see the ID of this student, it's 25. Just one thing to remind you, if that query is open as a tab, so the query that I use is called enroll SID to CID. So if that query is open as a tab, in my form, if I try to run that query, since it is open as a tab, it is going to navigate into that query in the datasheet view, which doesn't make sense. So since this was an insertion query, it should run the query. But since we are using the open query action, if that query is open as a tab already, it navigates into that in the datasheet view. So if you are getting something like this in your project, be careful. The queries that you try to run should not be open as a tab. One other thing, so for the same student, let's say for 25, I should not be able to add the same course again. So if I try to enroll, because of the setup of our database, it is not going to add it, because in the enroll table, student ID and course ID they contribute to the primary key of that table. So the tuple cannot appear twice in that table. So because of the key violation, it says that we cannot add it. but the user might not get the error, right? So okay, for 25, this students, these courses seem like they are available, but we are not being able to add them. So the better thing would be to just list the courses that this student can enroll into. For example, for some of the students, they are enrolled to all of the courses. Then in that case, we do not want to show all of these courses. For some of them, maybe let's say one course is available to enroll, then I would like to just see that course. So we are going to do such a query. And for now, we have list courses of students query. So for example, the one that I just enrolled into Math 101, the student ID was 25. If I try to list the courses of the 25, I get this result. So if we look at into the design view, this query was done using the design view. We were getting the SID as a parameter, and we are showing the courses this student is enrolled into. And using this query, we are going to create some new query. So if I look at into the SQL view, since this was created using the QBE, the SQL code is generated automatically. Therefore, it has some inner joins, etc. If we were to write it directly, we would use the where conditions to perform the join operations. But I know that out of this query, there comes the course code, course name, and grade of a student with some specific ID. So based on this, I'm going to write some new query. So going to create and then the query design. This is going to be my new query. I'm going into the SQL view. So I know that out of here, I can get the course codes. But I would like to see the courses that are not included in this list. So remember, whenever I run this query, so for example, if I run it for 9, so these are the courses that student number 9 is already enrolled to. And I need the courses that do not appear in this list. So in this query, again, I would like to show some course code and course name. This time from the course table, all the available courses, but except for some of them, I will have some where condition saying that, okay, the course code should not be in this list. So not in, and I'm using this part as a subquery to indicate that it's a subquery. I should use the parentheses so in between these parentheses, it's the SQL code that I have in list courses of students. So it's the same one. I know that it is going to list the courses that this student is enrolled to. And since I just need one value, I'm going to get rid of the course name and grades in this subquery. So it is going to give just the course codes, and I'm interested in the course codes that are not in this subquery's result set. So I'm going to save this query. Let's call it list available courses of SID. And just one more thing. So the student that we are interested in, previously we were giving it as a parameter. Now we would like to get it from this enrolled table. So inside the enrolled form, I have a combo box, and remember this combo box was called SID. I would like to get the student ID from that SID. So I'm going to say, okay, I have inside all the forms, I have a form called enroll, and inside that I have a combo box called SID. Get the value out of it. For that student, it will first find the courses that this student is enrolled to, and then we are kind of getting the difference out of all the courses, which ones are not taken by this student. So I'm going to save this query, I'm going to close it. Going back to my enroll form, We do not need this other query as well. I'm going to close it. So inside my enroll form, I'm going into the layout view. So previously in this combo box, I was getting the values from the course table. But now I would like to get rid of this combo box because like changing the data of a combo box through the properties, it is kind of confusing. It is better to create it using the wizard. So I'm going through design and then choose the combo box, edit as a new combo box. I'm going to get the results out of a query, next, and then I will find my query under this queries part. It was called list available courses of SID. Next, I would like all the available fields. I don't need to order them. So this is some example view, but since this is dependent on a parameter, it is not able to show an example view, but I see that the columns are like in the correct form. I will click on next. Again, I'm going to use the return value. It should be the primary key, which is the course code. Next, and next to it, what should the label contain? Let's say course, and I will click on finish. So going into the form view, now if I try to list the courses, the student 12 was already written in this part. So it is the courses that are available to student number 12. But if I change the student and try to list the courses again, it is going to show the values for the same student for now. If I hit the F5 key on my keyboard to refresh it, then it is going to update. For example, the student 8 is taking all the available 4 courses. Therefore, now I do not have anything in this list. If I choose student number 9, if I hit the F5 key on my keyboard to refresh the query of this combo box, it is going to update. Okay, it works, but it's not that user-friendly, right? So I need to hit the F5 key on my keyboard to refresh it. Otherwise, if I just change the value, it doesn't change. So now we are going to fix that. And what I would like to do is, whenever I change this student in this combo box, I would like to update the query that is attached to my second combo box. Let's go into the layout view. In the layout view, while my first combo box is selected, under the event tab, I have some events defined. So whenever one of these events happen, I can execute some macro. So for example, I have like on enter, if the user is hitting the enter key on the keyboard on this item, I can do stuff. The thing I would like to do is on change. So I have under this event tab of this first combo box, I have the on change event. Whenever I change the value of this combo box, whenever I choose some other student, I would like to run some macro. And to attach a macro to this event, while the on change line is selected, I have this 3 dots button. If I click on it and if I choose the macro builder and click on OK, then I can execute some macro. This is the same macros, but it is going to be executed. It's going to be run when I change the combo box's value. And what I want to do is to rerun the query that is attached to one of the items. So one other thing that we are going to use in here is requery. For some of the items like combo boxes and list boxes, we can attach query with the wizards. And to rerun that attached query, we have this action called requery. And I need the name of that item. So for the code, for the course code, the name was CID, if you remember. And since we are in the same form, we can directly refer to it. But okay, since we just created it, we did not give a name to it, so that's why it did not autocomplete. So if I close this, I'm going to, okay, let's say save the macro. If I look at to this new combo box, so the previous one was called CID, and let's rename it as CID again. So this is the new one that is attached to the new query for listing available courses of SID. So while this second combo box is selected, I will change its name to CID. So I can rename it as with any name, but if I name it CID, it's the previous name, then I can keep my other queries as well. So if you remember, I have an insertion query for enroll. It expects the name CID, so therefore I named it with the same old name. So in my enroll table, I was writing macro for this student combo box. If I choose that student combo box, if I go into the event tab of the property sheets, if the property sheet is not open, I can right click and open the property sheet for that item. For the on change events, since I saved the empty macro, it says there is embedded macro. If I click on these three dots, it will go back into the macro that I started creating. It did not contain anything. I'm going to use the require action, and the item name is CID. So I have a combo box called CID there. Refresh the query that is attached to that item. So I'm going to save it and close it. And going back into the form view, now if I change the student without needing to hit the F5 key, it also changes the available courses automatically, because since I changed the value of this first combo box, it updates the query that is attached to the second combo box. Let's also do one more thing. So let's say I'm looking courses of this available courses to the student 12. Let's say I choose something here, then I go back into one other student, so it is still written Math 102, but if I try to list the courses, there is no available course. So whenever I change a student, I would like to also clear this value out. So I would like to remove whatever is written in this course combo box. So going back into the layout view, I choose the student combo box. I had an event on change. I would like to edit it. I clicked on the button with three dots. I would like to use the set property action. So one other thing that we use from action set, let's say, is to set the property of an existing element inside our form. So the item that I would like to clear the value of it is CID. So it is the combo box. Okay, in the combo box as well there is some value written, and which property of it I would like to change. It's the value of it. So you can change different properties of it, like the color of it, caption of it. You can like enable or disable the visibility, etc. I would like to clear the value of it. So what's written inside an element is the value. For text boxes as well, if this was a text box, I would like change the value of it, and the thing that I would like to set it to is going to be just empty string. So I can type something to make it equal to something, but I would like to clear it, so I would have an empty value there. So I'm going to save it, close it, and I would like to clear the value whenever I enroll the student into the course as well. So going back into my buttons macro, I'm going to do the same two things in here as well. Because why? So if I enroll a student into a course, I would like to clear the value and update the query, because I may be adding lots of courses to the same students. If I do not change the value of the first combo box, then the second one would not be updated for now. But I don't want that. Whenever I add the course, whenever I enroll, I would like to also do the same thing for the second combo box. So I'm going to requery to update the available courses for the CID, and I'm going to also set property for CID again, and the value of it is going to be an empty string. So I'm going to save it now, close it, going back into the form view. Let's look at, for example, this new student. These are the courses available to that student. Let's enroll to English 101. I'm clicking on enroll to course. It is going to append the 25 and Eng 101 into the enroll table. And whenever this happens, it's going to clear the value of the course. And also it just updated these the content of the combo box as well. And if I choose some value, let's enroll to the same course again. Maybe I choose Math 102 and then maybe I switch into some other student, the value is cleared out. So Math 102 is available for that student as well. But for example, for some of the students, it will not be available. For example, student number 13 is already taking Math 102, so it's not displayed, and we cleared the content of this combo box. We will just look at one last thing before finishing. So one last action is open form, and using this subset of actions you can do your projects, so you don't need any more actions. So open form is used to navigate into some other form. So these are the forms that we have currently. If I go into the layout view, I can add some new button, close the wizard, let's call it go to insert form. I can go into the macro of this button with the macro builder. I can use this open form action, choose one of the forms. So I would like to go into the insert form whenever I click on this button. The other settings, I don't need to play with them. I'm going to save it and close it. And inside the insert form as well, I'm going to give an option to go back to the enroll form. In your projects as well, we expect some menu, like you will show the contents, the functionality. I added a new button, canceled the wizard. Let's say go back to enroll. So if I go into the build events using the macro builder, now I would like to open form and the name of the form is enroll. So if I save it, close it, and go into the form view of user insert form, I have the option to go back to enroll form, and in here I can go to the insertion form. And in your projects as well, it would be the best if you can navigate to all of your forms using such buttons. So you might have a welcoming page with like some of the functionality that you can do, and in that menu you can choose an option to go to a specific form, and then you will be like able to perform some of the options there. And if I like close everything, saving them, if I just have the user insert form opened, for example, when you use the open form action, if that form is not open yet, it will open it. So if I start typing on this form, if I navigate to them, navigate back, since it was open, it just navigates into, but going back to the enroll form, if the user insert form was not open, it will like open it. So that's all for today. If you have any questions, problems, you can ask. The video is recorded. I'm going to like send you the link once it's uploaded, and I'm going to also send you the database file with these forms so you can like play with it. Any questions, problems? If not, then we are finished. So see you later.